Okay, we're doing it. Welcome to our first Fridays for Future post, flipping the narrative on the climate crisis. We're going to be talking about solutions that we already have and how they may look practically in our everyday lives here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and breaking down the big picture and looking at different perspectives and how it all fits together. And so I think that's a really important part. We haven't been listening a lot to other perspectives and working out how that all fits in to the bigger picture. And first up are a couple of the Milienza Mothers team. There's Olivia from Nelson and Alana from Taupo. And they navigate a few different roles, mother, scientist, and also daughters of farmers, farming families. And they're here to talk today about some potential solutions for our agricultural sector, and the rural-urban divide and how that relationship can be bridged and not politicized. So welcome, guys. Tell us a bit more about yourself. Alana, did you want to go first?
Hi, I'm Alana. I am an ecologist by trade and a mum of two little girls. And my dad and my brother are on the family farm where I grew up, and they farm beef. And as an aside, right now I'm running for Waikato Regional Council because I strongly believe that having a foot in both worlds, being an ecologist and having a strong understanding and a strong caring for our environment, but also being a farmer's daughter and understanding the rural perspective, I feel like that's a voice that's missing around regional council table. So, and that's also why I'm here talking today, because yeah, I'm both those things. A mother, I am a mother, all three of those things. Yeah, a mother, an ecologist, and a farmer's daughter. And I think those shared perspectives give us sort of just a little bit more of a deeper understanding of the big picture. Olivia, do you want to go next?
Right, I think you can hear me now. Hi, I'm Olivia. I live in Richmond near Nelson. I'm a mum of two wee kids, a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. I also grew up on a farm. I grew up on a mixed horticulture, sheep and beef and forestry farm. And then I went to university and studied to become a scientist as well. I did past climate change for my PhD, looking at glaciations in the South Island. And then I've done, before my kids, I did some work on health effects of climate change into the future. I'm very, very passionate about agriculture and rural communities, and I'm quite disheartened with a lot of the politicizing of the issue and the extremes. And so, yeah, I really want to talk about how we can work together rather than just fighting about things. Back to you, Alicia.
Awesome. Well, thanks for both taking the time. I know you're really busy, as we all are. And I think it's a really, really important subject. And as we've talked about this week, it is a huge subject. So we can only cover a few things today. We can have a whole series just on this alone. So one of the questions I had was regenerative farming. It seems to be a bit of a buzzword at the moment. I mean, we saw the 2040 film last night, and that was a big part of it, was in there, but that's in Australia. And in New Zealand, we have very different landscape and a very different way of doing things. So can you tell us a little bit more about what it actually means, and if it is a one-size-fits-all solution, or are there a variety of potential solutions? Does it differ from region to region and farm to farm type thing? Just so that us townies can have a better idea of what the situation is. Alana.
I'll go first. Thanks, Alicia. Yeah, so regenerative agriculture, it is, as you're saying, it is a buzzword. And the principles, I think the principles can work anywhere, but whether or not it will store extra carbon sort of depends on the conditions. And lots of our soils in New Zealand are already pretty much maxed out for carbon. Not all of them, but in some places in New Zealand, the soil carbon is already almost as much as it can hold. And so practicing regenerative farming in those areas might have some other benefits, like for water quality or just having to put less inputs into your farm, but not necessarily in every area will it store extra carbon. But there has been some research done at Massey University about almost, because deep, the top 30 centimetres of soil is sort of where the carbon gets stored, but even deeper down is called the subsoil, and there's very little carbon in the subsoil usually. So they have done some research at Massey about flipping the whole soil over of a whole paddock, and so then that subsoil doesn't have much carbon in it, and you could store extra carbon in there. So there are some like interesting technological solutions to that, to some of these things. But so that's my little input into regenerative agriculture. And now, Olivia, do you want to share something?
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the mic. So when looking at the suite of things that can be in regenerative agriculture, one of the big things is the low tilling or no tilling of the soil and the ground. So there's some really interesting technology of different types of no tilling machines that are putting the seeds straight into the ground without having to flip everything over like you often see. So one of those that's kind of got some potential. But I don't know too much about it, but it does look have some potential. And other things is looking at the fertilizer use. So we have increased our fertilizer use a lot in the last 30 years. And that's been part of the drive to increase production and intensify. So there's lots of things in the regenerative agriculture we could potentially look at to try and reduce our fertilizer use and nitrogen loss. There's a couple of other things that's really interesting is looking at managed grazing, and also conservation agriculture was talking about the no-tilling. So there's quite a few different potential things that can come into the regenerative agriculture, although it's one of those things that lots of people have different takes on it. So as a word, it's not really necessarily that useful, because it's really about lots of different practices that need to suit individual farms for their conditions, for their bedrock, for their soils, for their climates, for their slopes. So yeah, unfortunately it's not sort of a quick fix, Alicia. That'll be it for me.
Yeah, and it doesn't sound like it. So it sounds like it's a lot more complex than meets the eye. So do you have any ideas on different solutions? Like what, just talking to your own families and community, what are some of the things that are being talked about at the moment? Alana.
Well, there's sort of a different regenerative solution depending on, as Olivia said, depending on your climate or your rainfall or your slope. One sort of regenerative farming practice would be going back to the old ways of using clover and nitrogen fixing plants to fix our nitrogen. So as Olivia said, we don't have to use artificial fertilizer, which is made from petrochemicals. And another, using more trees in our landscapes, even though that's a whole, you could have a whole series on planting more trees, but using more trees in a silver pasture way. So you have a few trees scattered around your paddocks. So those trees in the paddocks are storing carbon, but there's still enough sunlight to grow adequate grass for the stock. Or even there's some smaller shrubby trees you can use that are also good for the stock to eat. So those they store more carbon than just grass alone, but they're also a food source for the animals. So that's another solution that depending where you are and depending what animals or you have on your land, that's one solution to be using different farming methods that can store more carbon and be kinder on the landscape, really.
Oops, Olivia. Olivia's disappeared. Yeah, that's really really interesting. So what kind of support would farmers need to transition to that kind of like farming? Like what are some realistic things that they would need from government and other communities to help them do this?
Well, farmers are pretty time poor. Most farmers I know work at least 10 hours a day, probably 7 days a week. They never have a weekend. They barely go on holiday. So, and it can seem, and they're usually really highly indebted as well, unless they've got a family farm that they've inherited, no mortgage on it, which is pretty rare. Then they've got a big mortgage they've got to pay, and so the risk of trying something new can seem really high. So I think if there's more funding for agricultural innovation, so they can get some funding to try these new methods, and so take away some of that risk of trying these new techniques, then it won't be so scary though. And you don't necessarily need to convert the whole farm. You could try some of these techniques in a few paddocks and see what kind of difference it makes. So yeah, I think more understanding that it seems like a massive risk. Imagine if you've been a plumber all your life and someone says, oh, well, now you've got to go be an electrician. You know, that's sort of like changing the type of farming you're doing is a big change, and you don't know how to do it. So you need some training and some support and some patience from the general public, really, while you try something new. So I think offering our support and trying to understand the complexities of being a farmer is part of the picture. Back to you.
There are some really, really good points, because it just that is like in the 2040 film, it just makes it look, oh yeah, do that, that's an awesome solution, let's go for it. But like you said, you've already said about the carbon, to sequester that down, it's not as realistic here as it might be in Australia. And then I love your analogy about the plumber and the electrician. Like you just don't think about it. Like I'll admit I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to, you just think farming's farming and you just go out there and do your thing. But clearly it's a lot more complex, and the solutions are also a lot more complex. But it's really good to know that they do exist. It just means that we need to also be pressuring government to support farmers, to support them retraining, to support them using different practices in different ways. So yeah, Olivia, did you have some ideas on, we've kind of covered some different solutions for different farms, and the support, like what are your ideas around supporting farmers?
Hi. Sorry about that. Well, because I kind of like to put a little bit in perspective about what's happened in the last 30 years as well, because it's not like we've just been continually increasing all our emissions in agriculture. So, for example, like the sheep farmers, they've had a reduction of 50% of their numbers since 1990, and at that same time, they've only reduced production by 8%. And so overall, they've had about a 30% decrease in their emissions. So, which is actually, and it's the same with, even though dairy emissions have more than doubled, that's mainly because we've had a huge increase in cow numbers. Actually, the amount of emissions per kilogram of milk or something, it's actually gone down as well. So our farmers have actually been reducing their emissions. Well, they haven't necessarily been trying to reduce their emissions, but just by trying to be better farmers and being more efficient, they've already reduced their emissions by quite a lot. And since 2012, we haven't, agriculture emissions have flatlined. It hasn't been going up, not like transport. Transport's the main thing that's going up. So in some ways, we don't have to throw everything out the door and say agriculture has to completely change. I think there does need to be changes because this is really important, and the crisis we're in, we've got very little time to do what we need to do to try and turn this around. And with methane, there's a huge potential because it's got such a huge impact in its first 20 years. So if you can reduce methane by quite a lot, we can have quite a big short-term reduction in our emissions, which is really, really important right now, which is what the whole world needs to do. We don't need to get rid of all livestock. We don't need to get rid of all our dairy and all our sheep and beef. We do need to diversify. We need to look at the different areas, I think, that we are doing all the various different productions, and look at our other environmental issues like water quality as well, and take everything holistically. And as Alana said, we need support, you just can't expect people to change straight away. And, it's huge change, even going from one crop to another, different horticulture, kiwi fruit to apples or something like that. That's quite a big change. It takes a long time to learn how to grow them and their own little quirks. So, farmers are under a lot of pressure. That's a really high stress and high risk, weather events just take things out and you don't have an income for a year. And that's really high risk and really stressful. That's probably what I say. There's a lot of awesome things that our farmers are already doing. Lots of our farmers and different farms around the country are already doing amazing things. And I think that's the thing. There's already lots of examples in New Zealand with farms that are doing really well, are reducing their emissions, reducing their environmental impact as a whole, and doing wonderful things. I suppose the last thing I would end on that is that for sheep and beef farms, they have about 17% of our national forests, or 1.4 billion hectares of our native forests on their land already. And that's pretty awesome. That's a lot of their land is taken up with native trees already. And that's not including wetlands and all the waterways they've been fencing off recently. So we need to recognise that and say they're actually doing a huge amount of biodiversity already and sequestering carbon. And so it's what can we do to help them do more, do it quickly. That's what I say.
Awesome, thanks for that. I know that that's something that you've talked about a lot is mental health and farmers, and they probably know the weather back to front, like they're probably, if anything, like my husband who works for Doc, constantly checking the weather every day, what it's going to do. So I guess they're probably one of the first to be hugely impacted here by climate change. So the upshot is they need not judgment, but more help, focus on working together, more solution focused, and not allowing ourselves in urban areas buy into that whole divide, buy into that politicization, being politicized over what's the word I'm looking for? Vilifying farmers. So I think we've all mentioned that they have the potential, or can be, the world leaders in farming and diversifying, and be some of the superheroes of climate change. I think, is that you, Olivia, that's quite passionate about that one?
Olivia's disappeared again.
Okay. So, Alana, did you want to
I guess
talk about that?
I think the trees, like Olivia said, how 17% of our native forests are on sheep and beef country at the moment. That's massive. And if we want to plant 1 billion trees, you know, that's one of our big solutions to sequester carbon and to reduce our net emissions. Then where are we going to plant those trees? We sort of will need to plant them on private land. We don't have that much. Well, all the public Department of Conservation land's already covered in trees. So when it comes to doing what we can to rise to meet these problems that are coming towards us, we've got to work together with our farmers. We can't be against them. We need to work together. And then this is an unrelated topic, but so I know, meat, everyone, stop eating meat, that's bad. But not all meat is the same. There is some meat that produces methane, and there's some meat that doesn't. And so particularly things like free-range pork, pigs don't actually produce methane. So if we can find a way to perhaps free-range pigs as, diversify and have some free-range pigs on some of our land, if we can do it in a way where we're not causing excessive erosion, that could actually have a positive effect on climate if we can grow pork instead of some of our higher methane animals. So, I mean, plants are good, and I'm also trying to eat more plants, but yeah, it's not black and white, and it's not simple, and that's another big take-home point, I think, is it's a complicated system. Right, back to Olivia.
Just one point on that. It's something, as an introvert, I kind of look at all these different conversations going on and all these different ideas and all the different groups. We really, really need to make sure that we stick to big picture thinking and not just that all or nothing black or white thinking, that there's just going to be different ways in different areas for different people. It's complex, and it's going to be awesome, but we're all going to have to make different changes in different ways. So, and just to keep talking through that. Olivia.
Okay, sorry about that. For some reason, when I hit my unmic, it just disappears. So I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, I suppose I've been leading on for something that Alana said about different emissions. Often I think a lot of people have heard from our farmers that our beef and our sheep and our dairy sectors are the lowest emissions producing in the world per kilo of milk solid or meat. And that is kind of important. And if we when talking about being climate heroes, there's lots of things we can do on farm, and there's also the skills that our farmers already have and are developing that we can export overseas. And because we need to eat, and everyone, their own biology requires them to eat in different ways, and some people actually are not going to be able to live on plant proteins alone. So I think there's always needs to be a space for meat at the moment, because there is no alternatives for some people. We need choice, as you were saying, Alicia. Choice is really important. You take away choice, that's really scary. I've been thinking about that. So there's so much potential. A lot of our sheep and beef farms, and probably a lot of our dairy farms, if you take into account their trees already on their property and some of the other practices they do, they might be just about carbon neutral already. So the question is how much more we should ask them to sequester on their land. How much more should they plant trees, versus how much we should be as a whole society reducing our emissions. Because really what we need now is we need our trees that we plant now to draw down what we've already put up in the air to start slowing climate change down, not keep from offsetting our current ways of going. We need to to solve this, it's pretty clear we need to start getting carbon dioxide out of the air, not keep on putting it in. So I think that's often quite a frustration, I think, of many farmers, that it needs to go both ways. We really need to have a conversation about, and it's been unfortunate this year that a lot of the legislation and stuff that's been coming through, it's been very heavily focused on agriculture and not on the rest of our society and our transport. Because carbon dioxide and methane are not the same, nitrous oxide are not the same. And it's been great that the governments have been treating it differently, but I don't think we're having a conversation about what is the really, really important one, and it is carbon dioxide. We really need to reduce that as quickly as possible. Back to you, Alicia.
Awesome, thanks for that. I think it's definitely given me a lot of food for thought. And and I'm really keen to learn more, and to it would be amazing if we could reach out and talk with farmers about going and helping them out with what they need on their property, like helping them with like planting trees, help clean up the waterways, all that kind of stuff, because we're all in it together, we're all part of it. And then look at ourselves, and because I know in Wellington, I think I read somewhere it was like 40% of emissions were just from our cars alone. I mean, that's huge. So it's like just looking at the big picture and how all these pieces fit together and what we all need to be doing, instead of pointing the finger at each other all the time or criticizing potential solutions that may not be ideal, but it's what we've got to work with now, working towards, because there's, technically ethical issues with electric cars, and then that where you recharge the battery, like that source can actually negate the whole having the electric car. So it's kind of, some really big questions, and trying to work together for the solutions. Have either of you got anything more that you'd like to say? Just stick your hand up to finish off, anything that's popped up. Like from your family's perspective, if you want to, has anything come up for you both there that you think they would like you to share or not? All right, Alana.
Well, my father is often saying that everyone's always saying we need to plant more trees, we need to plant more trees. But if half of those people even planted a tree, then we'd already be there. So I think if we can find ways to work with our farmers and help them plant the trees, that would be an amazing way to build the bridges and to get this job done faster. And I mean, the trees are for all of us, they're not for the farmers. So if us urban people can get involved in that, I think, that's just going to go so much of the way towards solving our problems.
Okay, and so one of the things that everyone can do right now is actually try and reduce as much possible your food wastage. It's actually a really massive thing. We globally, I think there's some estimations of about a third of food is wasted at various different, and that's huge. So that's one of the big things that we all can do is respect our food. There's a lot of energy and time and effort that goes into growing our food and moving it around and getting it to us safely. And our food, and a lot of our farmers do produce really high quality, nutritious food. Respect it and try not. I know it's hard. I waste food because things get lost and looking after family and stuff, but that's a major thing that we can all do today. And I think that's it. Let's start. Thanks a lot, Alicia, Alana.
Okay, thank you both so much. It's been really interesting, and I'm sure further down the track we can talk more more in depth about some of the things that you've brought up, and maybe have some more friends and family come and have a chat as well. That'd be really cool. And yeah, and next week we've got at 3:30, I think, James Renwick, who's a professor at Victoria University and a climate guru in New Zealand, coming to have a chat. So yeah, message the page or in the group if you've got any questions that you'd like me to ask. And otherwise, yeah, thanks for listening, and thanks again, guys. Bye.